This is the Free Spirits of L&D podcast, where we talk about life as a freelancer in the fascinating world of learning and development, and ask our guests all the questions you wanted to know but were maybe too afraid to ask. Yes, we even talk about how we get business and what we all charge. At the end of each episode, each guest gets to set a bonus question for the next one. So whether you're thinking about taking the leap, brand new to freelancing, or an experienced freelancer, you won't want to miss this. In this episode, our guest is Viv Cole. Viv is an experienced instructional designer, facilitator and trainer, and he's been freelancing since 2002. Welcome, Viv.
Oh, thanks for having me, Mark.
You're so welcome. I had to get my calculator out to figure out how long ago 2002 was, because in my head that's like 10 years ago, but in fact it was 22 years ago.
Let's take a decade out of that, surely.
Let's take a decade out. What's a decade? If you can cast your mind back to 2002 when you set up your own business, can you just share with us the story of how you came to the realization that you wanted to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. And, whilst I was thinking about this podcast, there is kind of a typical life cycle that freelancers go through, which is 5 sort of steps, really. Sort of first, you decide that you're going to take the plunge. Then you do the setting up and the launching of the business. You have your first clients. You grow the business to the point that it feels stable. And then beyond that, you're looking to scale, leverage your reputation so that there's some lasting business value left over. Of course, in real life, these things aren't quite so simple and quite so linear. So, in fact, I started that nice process on step 3 rather than step 1. So, back in 2001, you will find me working as a training manager at Deloitte. It's so long ago that it was called training rather than learning. So I was in a situation when our team had achieved a lot in a short amount of time, and I could feel the development and the pace and the excitement slowing down a little bit. I was also conscious that for me to make progress within the firm, I was relying on some of my friends to leave. And intriguingly enough, one of my very good friends is still there. So had I been waiting for him to leave or get promoted, then I would have had 30 years doing the same job. But I had a very supportive boss who I talked about my ambitions with. At the point that we were talking, I'd always fancied the idea of running my own business. I took the view that I was still pretty young. If it went horribly wrong, then I still had time to go back and get a proper job. And so we talked about how we could best make that happen. And one of the things that we agreed was that I would leave and then come back and do training and consultancy with the firm. And that effectively gave me my first client and also some of the security and stability to then go back to the earlier stages of a freelance business in terms of getting things set up, getting my marketing materials together, going through the terror of realizing that I was my own IT support helpline. And that really launched me into the world of freelancing.
Gosh, there's a lot in that. I was drawn to what you said about going through the terror. You kind of skipped over that. Going through the terror of realizing that. Can you just share a bit more about just coming to terms with the idea that it was just you and only you to do all of these things? What was that like?
In some ways, really liberating. I remember one of my colleagues who I was invoicing, and he said, "Oh, wow, this must take you quite a bit of time to do." And I was going, Maybe within the firm it takes a long time to make an invoice. I've just created a Word document. Off we go. Boom. There were other moments where it was very much more about how do I recognize which parts of my job I'm good at and which bits I need help, and where I need help, is that something I can grow my skills, or do I need to outsource? And one of the things which people will probably find a little bit ironic is that as a chartered accountant, you would think I'd be all over the financial side of things. However, I still employ an accountant myself because they will know more about how to save tax, what expenses can or cannot be claimed, than me working it out for myself. So very much that sense of it's really exciting not having to ask permission for people to do things, but also recognizing that there are many aspects to running a business, and having people that you can either ask for advice or things that you can outsource so that you can spend more of your time adding value.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would be surprised that a chartered accountant would outsource their accounting. But the way you've just described it there makes perfect sense, because I imagine when it is just you just have a limited amount of your time that needs to be spread across all these different areas of a business. And yeah, why not? Were there any other areas that you felt it was important to outsource relatively early on in that life cycle?
As such, there weren't really other areas that I thought I needed to outsource, but there were areas that I thought I needed to grow my skills in. For instance, marketing and sales. Fundamentally, the business was selling me, and so I felt that it was important to be able to market and sell myself in an authentic way and not have someone else do that for me. So that was certainly a learning curve to get up.
Yeah, I'm relatively early into my freelance journey, certainly compared to yours. But another aspect to my business that I do is that I do some video production work. And quite quickly, I realised that my capacity was being limited by not the just sitting down in front of a camera and recording, but actually editing it. So, for example, a 5-minute video might take me 2 days to edit and add all of the effects and B-roll and sort out the audio and lighting, etc. And it was massively limiting my ability to produce assets. So even though it was something I loved, I genuinely love editing video, I've had to come to terms with the fact that I need to outsource it. And I've started working with an editor, and it's been a really, really painful process to let go of something that I genuinely love doing in order to be able to do more and different things elsewhere in the business. But I think there is that, it can often be that element of conflict and tension, isn't it? When it comes to freelancing, that there will have to be a point where you have to go, I need to put this down. I need to give this to someone else so that I can do some of the other things that help the business function. And I was finding myself wondering whether you found anything similar, that it was actually something that you really enjoy doing, but you've had to stop it because the business demands more things from you.
I think largely I've been lucky that I can focus on things that I enjoy doing. And what I was thinking more of was later in the story, as my freelance business transitioned more from face-to-face training into digital learning, I became someone who wasn't just a freelancer, but was also heading up projects, bringing in developers, bringing in graphics artists, and running the whole project. And it was bringing in those other people which gave me access to different kinds of projects, in some ways different types of margin, different levels of value that I could offer clients by bringing them an integrated package to create a project end to end.
That's nice. So it opened up more possibilities for you.
Yeah, and I think also part of that was very much the importance of getting out there and networking, getting to know people, because it's not just a source of new business, but it's a way that you develop relationships with trusted people that you can refer in. They can refer you in. If you've got too much work, there's work that you can push their way and vice versa. And also just the opportunity to combine different people's skills in different ways and therefore solve client problems better.
I'm also interested to know a bit more about that transition period that you briefly referred to there, about moving from training into more digital learning. Can you share a bit more about what that period was like, about how you made that call to make that transition? What actually happened then?
I could claim that some sort of reasons involving crystal balls and being abreast of all the industry trends. The reasons were ultimately a lot more personal, because that's the beauty of it being your own business. I was at the point a few years in of partly using my training business as my cash cow whilst I could invest in new products and services in digital learning. And partly the personal reason was that if my business was going to be entirely going around delivering training, whilst it's fun to be in lots of different countries and to see different things, the reality was that I'd be spending, say, 100 nights a year in hotels rather than at home. And I had the aspiration to have a family. And for me to be in my picture of what a good dad looks like, I didn't think that was compatible with being away 100 nights a year. So I wanted to move the business in a way that would allow me to have that balance.
Yeah, I can definitely resonate with that. I think since my freelance journey coincided with a bunch of quite difficult family stuff going on, and it just meant that I had almost complete flexibility to be there for bedtime stories and bath times and dinner times, and made sure I had a proper deep relationship with my kids in this time of their lives when they probably needed me most. I know there'll come a point later on where they probably don't want to see as much of me as they do now, and I'm okay with that. And maybe I'll do some more travel when that comes up. But for now, I was really, really keen, like you, to sort of configure my life in that way so that my work was able to serve that rather than the other way around.
Absolutely. And having the flexibility to be at things like school sports days and walk them into school and be at the school plays, those were things which I'm so glad I made the time to do.
Yeah.
It's so much a trade-off between what's important to you and also the working hard. Because I think ultimately, when you are your own boss, you know when you're slacking off. It's a lot easier to fool someone else. And there are times when you need to give yourself permission to slack off. However, there are lots of times when I will have woken up in the middle of the night and grabbed a pad of Post-its and written down some stuff that I desperately hope makes sense in the morning, because I've had a great idea as to how I can improve the business or solve a problem for a client. I'm not convinced that the average person who is an employee is that invested. Of course, there are exceptions. And if you're listening to this right now, then of course you are one of the exceptions. But there is, for me, that sense that you've got the opportunity to see everything that you're doing, to get feedback and to do that better and to push yourself on.
Yeah. A couple of challenges there. I think if somebody's listening to this, in all likelihood, they're in the process of thinking about taking the plunge on that life cycle model. So potentially not. Potentially they might be doing some extracurricular activities in order to figure out how to take the plunge. The other thing that you said around, when you're slacking off, I sometimes think there is a flip side to that where this kind of almost toxic productivity sits in. And I've had this conversation with a few people lately where they talk about the benefits of being able to work whenever you want, being a double-edged sword, that you can absolutely work whenever you want. And if you've got the kind of mindset or personality that will probably nag you a bit and have that little internal voice going, why are you going for coffee with a friend this morning? You should be at work. And it often comes from somebody who's been in you called them proper jobs earlier on, but we'll talk about in an industry, maybe in a sort of industry job where it's a 9 to 5 or a 10 to 4 or something like that, where though in those hours of that day, you have to be productive and you have to be working on a project or a job or sending emails or in meetings, and extracting yourself from that model of how the world is and how the world works is a really big thing to do. You want to go for lunch with a friend in the middle of the day, you should do that, because if there is some work you should be doing, you'll be able to do it another time. It will probably it'll probably work. And in any case, who are you going to answer to? So I think there is an extra element to that of being able to know, yes, you're probably right. You do know when you're slacking off, but there also is an element of knowing when you probably should slack off a bit in order to not completely burn out and make yourself poorly because of the pressure that you've put on yourself to be the engine that drives your business.
Completely. And to some extent, when you're working for someone else, there are boundaries that they put around that, which are often in terms of these are the hours that we expect you to be available, or these are the outputs that we expect. When you're growing your business, all of your marketing and sales and networking is entirely open-ended. You conceptually can never know that you've done enough. There's always one more conversation that you ought to be having, or one more article that you ought to be writing. And I think that one of the challenges and one of the things that I've learned as a freelancer is to change your mindset so that it's a mindset of abundance rather than a mindset of fear. When you have the mindset of abundance, you are going out there confidently, you're talking to people. It doesn't matter if this meeting doesn't result in new business. You'll learn something from it. You'll take something away. You don't know when, at some point, it might be 10 years later, that somebody comes back to you and says, oh, I remember we had a conversation about this, and it just struck me at the time that this is quite like the thing I'm trying to solve for now. Let's have a conversation. And so there's not a linear relationship between the effort that you put into business development and what comes back. However, you know that if it's something that you don't keep on top of, then at some point you're going to have, in the world of peaks and troughs, you're going to have a trough. We can compare the flip side with being in a proper job, where however much effort you put in, are you going to get promoted? That's at the gift of your boss or their bosses, and there's not a linear relationship there between the effort you put in and what's going to happen in your career in the next couple of years. But in the world of freelance, I strongly believe that what you put in, you get out, and some of it's business, and a lot of it is fun and the sense of making a difference and getting to hang out with some really interesting people.
Yeah. Kim talked about this in her episode around just making it your business to be places. And I really like that. I think there's an element of that can feel a little bit pressured. You know, you might think, oh my gosh, how am I going to be at all these different industry events and networking and businesses? But actually, you're right. If you approach it from a mindset of abundance, it does help reframe things, and it just change your behavior. I think sometimes the danger of approaching those events with a mindset of, oh my gosh, I must come away with 4 deals, otherwise it's not broken even, or I need to talk to this person, otherwise it's been a huge failure. It can kind of contract the way that you might think about that activity in the future, and also probably make you make some really difficult decisions that might affect your business in the long term. That sort of short-term thinking. I have a friend who's also a freelancer, and she has this huge A4 size document framed. It's right next to her computer, actually. And on it, it just says, money is coming. And it's like a little mantra that she uses in order to just say, even if you're getting into that sort of panicky fear mindset stage of, oh my gosh, things are getting a bit quiet. Actually, she knows that if she continues doing all the things that she knows will grow her business, going to those events, reaching out to people, posting those articles, turning up on that podcast, for example, actually, it will eventually come to something. It will have an effect. And that can be both reassuring and helpful to put your trust in that.
Yeah, this conversation about conferences has just reminded me of one of the principles that I've always tried to apply in terms of, I think a good conference gives you 3 lots of 3 things. So meeting 3 new people, 3 new ideas that you can take away, and 3 conversations that you've had with people that you already knew that have moved things on. And so in my head, it's not, oh my God, I've spent a day at a conference, that's X £100 that I've not earned. It's very much, if I get my 3x3, that's great. If more happens, that's a bonus.
I love that. And actually, you and I were at a conference last week. We saw each other in London at the Learning Network conference. And I came away with all of those 3 things. But to be honest, if I had only come away with one of them, I would have been happy. But I really like having those different 3 layers to play with, because if you don't get the input from the stuff that's being outputted, actually there are ways of getting other value from those types of events. One of my very early mentors used to have these kind of little maxims and rules that she would often kind of parrot at us. And her first rule was always turn up, with the view being, if you don't turn up, someone else will probably turn up, and they will end up having that conversation and getting that value and nurturing those relationships and all the things you've just talked about. One of the things I really wanted to ask you about, Viv, in the context of that life cycle, that I think a lot of relatively new freelancers might be surprised by, was just the concept of thinking about exit. Particularly when you're a one-person business. I can imagine a lot of people who are new to freelance, maybe in the training space or the sort of learning and development space, maybe they're coaches or consultant facilitators, thinking, wow, okay, so I'm sort of pushing myself 10, 20 years down the line, maybe longer, thinking about actually selling this business. How is that even possible when I am my business? How can I start to think about my business in that way, even at this early stage? What sort of things could people be thinking about? What sort of questions could they be asking themselves to try and have that end in mind of scaling and exit to help them step out of that thinking?
The good news is that you don't have to think about it right at the start. It's something which, ideally, as an exit, you would have successors to hand over to, or you would have some products or services which are some kind of passive income stream. I'm not going to claim I've got any of those. That's something which, after 20 years, I haven't cracked. However, for some businesses, it may be a possibility. So when it comes to the point where you retire or you go back and do a proper job, that there's some value in the business which someone else will pay you for.
Yeah. And I think within that, there is this kind of paradox of running your own business and trying to stop yourself thinking of yourself as the business. Because often as freelancers, our businesses are just our names with limited afterwards. And that can sometimes, I think, engender this way of thinking of okay, I am the business. It's all on me. I'm the person that's doing the selling. I'm doing the accounting. I'm doing the delivery. I'm doing the kind of the growing of the business. And I think sometimes that can trap people into thinking that actually there isn't a way out. And very often there is. I think that there is inherent value in a lot of businesses where people don't often see it, whether it's about the kind of customers that you work with or even the systems that you've built. I worked with a team a little while ago where it was a consulting business, but they just built a really cool website for sending out questionnaires and assessments. And someone turned up and bought the whole business because they just wanted that skeleton that they'd built, and they ended up using it for something else. So there are often multiple ways of exiting a businesses and being able to scale that very often, if you're in the weeds of it, it doesn't often present itself.
Yeah, and I think it's helpful to look at this in terms of different stages, because I know when I was setting up my business, there were so many other things to think about. I could have spent hours and days coming up with an imaginative name to capture what my business was doing. I took the decision to make it easy on myself and to name the business after me, which was a decision that took about 30 seconds. And given the way that my business has transitioned from a training business to a digital learning business to more of a consultancy and coaching type business, if I'd come up with a name which made sense at the start, it may not make sense at stage 4 or stage 5, and then you'd be trapped in a name that didn't resonate with your clients or your portfolio of services. I think the recognition here is that there's no particularly easy answer, but also recognize that it's not something that you need to agonize about.
Yeah.
If there are some things like your business name that you can park, nobody is going to buy your services just because you've come up with the most blinding name that there isn't already a website domain for. What people buy you for is that they have the trust and the confidence that you can take away some of their problems.
Yeah, people buy people, absolutely. And I guess the kind of practical mechanics of all of that as well is that I know a lot of consultants who operate in this way is that you have a trading name, which could be your name and limited, and then you can have all kinds of different brands and business names that sit underneath that. It can be all of those things. If you decide that you want to have a consultancy arm that looks different to a coaching arm, that looks different to a training arm, that looks different to a digital learning arm, all of those things are possible, and you don't have to agonize over it being one thing that's etched in stone forever and ever. Lots of those things just aren't really spoken about, and it's good to hold that stuff up to the light. You're absolutely right. And I know there are lots of people who are new into freelancing who just get completely lost in the branding piece and making sure it's absolutely perfect, and it's the wrong thing to focus on.
I think that was also why on the L&D Free Spirits website blog, I've put together an article that talks about the stages of a freelance business, because partly there's not that much guidance out there, and secondly, there is a lot to think about. There's a lot to do. Breaking it down into some stages of, okay, I can see what's around the corner, but I don't need to worry about that yet, is for many very helpful in terms of prioritizing your effort and your energy, and just taking the comfort that actually this is a thing that my brain is telling me to worry about, but actually I don't need to worry.
And that's where having a really good network of peers like the Free Spirits Network can really help reframe stuff around, you seem to be worrying about this, don't worry about it. There's other things that you can look at. There's other ways that you can redistribute your energy and focus.
Completely. And it's a network of people that keeps you sane as you go through the various growing pains, and understanding how markets are changing and what opportunities that brings.
So last episode, Viv, Maria Salkeld was our previous guest, and she left a question for our next guest, not knowing that it would be you. And that question was, what is one tip that you would give to someone who's in the early stages of going freelance? Have you got any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I would say invest the time to build your network. I think in learning and development, we're quite fortunate that people who are drawn to that are generally super helpful and willing to give advice and love to see other people make progress. Of course, there is the L&D Free Spirits community, which can help you get up and running and earning money faster.
And there's some great articles on that site that are completely freely available. I will link the one that you mentioned in the show notes for this episode so that people can go and check it out. Thank you for mentioning it. Did you want to leave a question for our next guest?
Sure. As someone who is a little bit of a bookworm, one of the things that I'm often curious about is what are people's favourite books and why? So my question for our next guest is, what's your favourite book? And tell us why.
Lovely. Are you able to share yours, Viv?
There were hundreds that I could have chosen, and I think the one that I've settled on was The Little Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. It is a children's book, and it's very short. It's actually super profound, and one that I've reread a few times because I think each time you take away different things from it, and I can remember what I took away from it as a child, and I can remember what I take away from it as an adult.
Thank you for sharing that, and I will leave that as the next question for our next guest. And this is the time when we ask the question that we ask everybody on this podcast, which is, what is your day rate?
Well, obviously it depends. And it
ring
depends.
The it depends bell. I'm going to ring it virtually, and we'll have a bell icon that comes on. Of course it depends.
And it depends on the value that I think I can bring to a situation. And in terms of current money, day rates that I've worked for in the last sort of 20 years, sometimes it's been as low as 350 a day. Sometimes it's been as high as 350 an hour. So really wide variety. Part of your freelance journey is understanding what your niche is, what your clients' alternatives are, and the more that you understand about the value that you bring and their alternatives and how expensive those alternatives are, then the more that you can position your services so that you make a decent margin on it.
What a great answer. Thank you, Viv. As we start to close off, I'm sure there'll be tons of people who want to know more about what you do, who you are. What's the best way of people finding you?
Usually the best way is to find me on LinkedIn, but I do have a website which is imaginatively named vivcole.co.uk. So thanks, parents. You gave me a nice, unusual name, which meant that I could get that domain.
Super duper. Thank you so much for everything that you shared on the show today, Viv, and it's been really wonderful having you with us.
Been an absolute pleasure, Mark. Thank you for being such a pro.
If you enjoyed this episode, let us know by leaving a review on your favourite podcast app. It really makes a difference. And if you want to learn more about how L&D Free Spirits can lift up your freelancing business, you can find out more information at ldfreespirits.com.